Tonight we journey north, into a world of iron, salt, smoke, and song. The year is 1000 AD, across the cold rim of Europe, where winter bites deep into the soil and summer burns brief and green across the meadows. The Viking world is alive. Not a single kingdom, not one people marching beneath one banner, but a vast and breathing web of farms, harbors, islands, fjords, river mouths, market towns, shrines, ships, halls, gods, graves, and memories. It stretches from the black cliffs of Greenland to the silver rivers of the east, from the storm-lashed coasts of Norway to the low fields of Denmark, from the wooded lakes of Sweden to the misted shores of Ireland, England, Francia, and beyond. To step into this world is to leave behind the easy image of the Viking as only a raider, a helmeted shadow leaping from a longship with axe in hand. That figure existed, fierce and real enough, but he was only one face among many. The Viking world was also made by women bending over looms in smoky houses, children driving sheep along stony tracks, smiths coaxing sparks from glowing iron, traders weighing silver on delicate scales, poets reciting the deeds of dead kings, and farmers watching the sky with the anxious patience of all people who depend upon the weather. This was a world of gods and mortals walking close together, not gods in some distant heaven, removed from human struggle, but powers felt in the storm, in the blade, in the field, in childbirth, in luck, in dreams, and in death. The sacred was not locked away. It lived in the shape of the landscape itself. A mountain could be holy. A grove could hold memory. A spring could whisper with unseen force. The dead were not gone in any simple sense. They lingered beneath mounds, inside stories, within family names, and perhaps within the very land that fed the living. Around the year 1000, the Viking Age stood at a turning point. Old beliefs still burned brightly, but new crosses were rising beside them. Kings were beginning to bind wide territories under firmer rule, coinage, law, taxation, and royal churches were changing the old order of chieftains and local loyalties. Yet even as that change gathered force, the sea still remained the great road of the north, and upon it moved the longships. Imagine them now, a gray morning, low cloud pressed against the horizon, the water dark as hammered metal. Then, cutting across the swell, a narrow hull appears, long and lean, its prow rising like the neck of some beast from an older age. The sail is square and swollen by wind. Oars dip and rise in rhythm. Shields flash along the side. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, not merely warriors, but sailors, traders, settlers, sons of farmsteads, servants of ambitious chiefs, and seekers of fortune. The ship does not fight the sea like some clumsy foreign vessel. It belongs to it. It flexes, glides, climbs, and falls, clinker-built, light, swift, and terrifyingly practical. It is one of the great technologies of the medieval world. Through such ships, the North became larger than itself. In the West, Norse settlers carved lives from Iceland, a land of fire, ice, lava fields, and grass-rich valleys. Farther still, they reached Greenland, where farmsteads clung to the edge of what seemed possible. Even beyond that, across unknown waters, they touched the shores of North America, a place later remembered in stories of timber, grapes, conflict, and distance. In the east, Swedish traders and warriors moved through river systems that opened like veins across the continent, carrying furs, wax, slaves, silver, silk, beads, and blades toward the Black Sea, the Caspian, and the glittering cities of the south. Some entered the service of emperors, some died nameless in foreign soil, some returned with wealth enough to change the fate of their families. But the heart of this world was not only overseas, it was the farm. The Viking world was built upon earth as much as water. Longhouses stood beneath turf or timber roofs, their interiors dim, warm, and crowded. Smoke curled from hearths. Animals shifted in byres. Tools hung from beams. Grain was ground. Butter churned. Cloth woven. Leather stitched. Iron mended. Fish dried. Meat salted. And ale brewed. Life was hard, physical, and intensely seasonal. The year moved not by abstract calendars alone, but by lambing, sowing, hay cutting, harvest, slaughter, winter stores, and the opening or closing of sailing weather. Archaeology brings us close to these lives, though never close enough to know them completely. Stratigraphic excavation reveals house floors, post holes, hearths, refuse pits, tools, beads, combs, spindle whorls, weights, bones, and seeds. Radiocarbon dating fixes fragments of wood, charcoal, and bone within the slow machinery of time. Isotope analysis can show where people grew up, what they ate, how they moved. Genomic data, drawn from ancient remains, has begun to complicate the old stories of identity, showing a Viking world far more mixed, mobile, and interconnected than any simple myth allows. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The soil gives us traces, not voices. A broken brooch can suggest wealth, movement, and style, but not the private grief of the woman who wore it. A sword in a grave can speak of status and violence, but not the dreams of the hand that once held it. Burned grain can tell us of farming, fire, and storage, but not the exact fear of the family who watched a winter supply vanish into smoke. The Viking world survives in fragments, and each fragment is a doorway into darkness. Around 1000 AD, those doorways open onto a changing world. In England, Scandinavian rulers and settlers had already transformed whole regions, leaving marks in law, language, place names, farming, and urban life. In Ireland, Norse towns such as Dublin had become centers of trade and power, places where conflict and commerce existed side by side. In Normandy, descendants of northern raiders had become lords of a new land, adapting with astonishing speed to Frankish speech, Christianity, cavalry warfare, and continental politics. In Scandinavia itself, ambitious rulers sought to gather scattered loyalties into kingdoms, often using Christianity as both faith and political instrument. Yet nothing was simple. Conversion did not descend like a curtain. Old customs endured. Crosses and hammer symbols could exist in the same generation, sometimes perhaps in the same mind. A person might accept baptism and still fear the old powers in storm and sickness. A king might build churches while relying on warriors whose imaginations remained shaped by older songs of fate, honor, and the hungry dead. This is why the Viking world cannot be understood as a clean boundary between pagan and Christian, barbarian and civilized, raider and farmer, Europe and the outside. It was a frontier of identities, a place where ideas moved with goods, where violence traveled beside diplomacy, where poetry preserved memory, and where the dead remained politically useful long after their bones had settled into the earth. And it was human. That is the most important thing. These were not crude shadows at the edge of history. They were our intellectual and emotional equals, living within a world that asked different questions and gave different answers. They studied winds, tides, stars, kinship, omens, law, reputation, and survival with extraordinary attention. They built ships without modern blueprints that could cross open oceans. They maintained trade networks over breathtaking distances. They crafted jewelry of astonishing delicacy. They composed poetry dense with metaphor and memory. They created law codes, assemblies, alliances, and settlements that reshaped the medieval North. But they also killed, enslaved, burned, raided, and took. Their world was not romantic. It was not clean. The splendor of a silver hoard may have begun as another family's ruin. The glory of a warrior buried with weapons may be inseparable from the screams of those he defeated. History does not ask us to admire without judgment. It asks us to look clearly. So we begin at the edge of the sea, where gulls wheel above a cold horizon and the first sail appears through mist. Somewhere inland, a smith strikes iron. Somewhere in a hall, a poet begins a story. Somewhere under a mound, bones lie beside beads, blades, horses, ships, or silence. Somewhere a child watches the adults speak of land, feud, voyage, and fate, not knowing that future centuries will call this the Viking Age. The wind rises, the tide turns, and the northern world opens. The house is low against the wind. From a distance, it seems almost grown from the earth itself, its turf roof green in summer, white in winter, dark and sodden in the long wet months between. Smoke slips through a hole above the hearth and spreads into the pale northern sky. Around it stand fences, pens, hayricks, sheds, and muddy paths worn by feet, hooves, and the dragging of timber. This is not the world of legend carved into a dragon prow. This is the deeper world beneath it, the one that fed the ships, raised the children, forged the tools, buried the dead, and remembered the names. A Viking farmstead was a living organism. Its heart was the longhouse, a structure of timber, turf, stone, and labor, shaped by climate, wealth, and local tradition. Some were modest, cramped, and smoky. Others stretched impressively across the ground, announcing the power of a chieftain through architecture itself. Archaeologists read these buildings through stains in soil, lines of post holes, collapsed wall banks, hearth remains, trampled floors, and the debris of everyday life. Stratigraphic excavation turns the vanished house into a layered memory. Each occupation surfaces a thin skin of human presence. Inside, the air would have been thick. Smoke from the central hearth did not always escape politely. It drifted, clung, blackened rafters, stung eyes, and flavored everything. The smell of wool, sweat, leather, stored food, damp wood, animal breath, and cooking fat would have mingled in the half-light. Along the sides of the hall were raised platforms used for sitting, working, and sleeping. The fire was warmth, kitchen, lamp, and gathering place. It was also a boundary, dividing space, shaping conversation, and drawing the household inward when darkness pressed against the walls. Life here was not quiet. Children cried, dogs barked, loom weights clicked, iron tools rang, people coughed in the smoke. Someone mended a shoe. Someone combed lice from hair with a carved bone comb. Someone turned a spit. Someone sharpened a knife. Someone told a story already known to everyone in the room, yet still worth hearing because the telling mattered as much as the tale. The household was not merely a family in the modern sense. It could include kin, dependents, hired laborers, foster children, guests, enslaved people, and animals housed under the same roof in colder regions. Status was everywhere, encoded in where one sat, what one wore, what one owned, who could speak freely, and who had to lower their eyes. The Viking world valued freedom intensely, yet it also rested upon unfreedom. Thralls, the enslaved, worked fields, tended animals, cooked, cleaned, carried, built, and served. Their lives are difficult to see in the written record, but archaeology forces them back into view through labor itself. Every farm was an argument with the environment. In the north, survival depended upon timing. Fields had to be prepared when the soil allowed it. Grain had to be harvested before rot, frost, or storm destroyed it. Hay had to be cut, dried, and stored. For animals were wealth only if they lived through winter. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, poultry, and dogs each occupied a place in the farm economy. Bones recovered from middens reveal slaughter patterns, diet, herd management, and hard choices made when fodder ran short. The year was a wheel of work. Spring brought mud, hunger, lambs, calves, repairs, and cautious hope. Summer demanded almost impossible energy, with haymaking, fishing, travel, building, and trading compressed into long days beneath the high sun. Autumn was slaughter, preservation, brewing, storing, bargaining, and calculating whether the household had enough to last. Winter narrowed the world to firelight, indoor labor, storytelling, tool repair, textile production, feasting if stores allowed, and fear if they did not. Women stood at the center of this world, not as decorative figures in the background of male adventure, but as managers of production, food, cloth, children, memory, and property. The keys worn by some women were not empty symbols. They signaled authority over storerooms and household resources, over the locked spaces where wealth became survival. Textile work alone was vast in importance. A sail required enormous quantities of wool, spinning, weaving, fulling, stitching, and maintenance. Every ship on the horizon carried within it the labor of hands that may never have held an oar. Spindle whorls, loom weights, needles, shears, and textile fragments are among the quietest but most powerful finds from the Viking world. They tell of hours beyond counting. They tell of skill passed from person to person, of girls learning patterns from older women, of cloth becoming clothing, blankets, trade goods, tents, bags, and sails. To speak of Viking expansion without speaking of wool is to describe a bird without mentioning wings. Food was both necessity and identity. A meal might include barley porridge, bread, fish, milk products, cheese, curds, butter, smoked meat, seal, whale in some regions, berries, nuts, onions, peas, beans, herbs, and ale. In coastal settlements, fish could dominate. In richer halls, feasting transformed eating into politics. To host well was to command loyalty, to distribute meat, drink, gifts, and honor was to bind people to a name. The hall was not merely a building. It was a theater of power. Feasts glittered in memory. Imagine benches crowded with bodies, firelight flashing on drinking horns, arm rings, brooches, blades, and wet eyes. Outside, frost grips the posts. Inside, voices rise. A leader gives gifts. A poet praises ancestry. Old wrongs are carefully not mentioned, or deliberately mentioned. Promises are made in drink that may later demand blood. Laughter and danger sit close together. The hall can warm a community, but it can also ignite a feud. Material culture reveals the astonishing range of ordinary beauty: a comb carved from antler, a glass bead from far away, a whetstone darkened by use, a tiny copper alloy pendant, a gaming piece, a child's toy boat, a patch on a shoe, a repaired pot. These things do not shout like swords, but they speak with an intimacy weapons rarely possess. They show people caring about appearance, leisure, skill, identity, and continuity. They show a world not waiting for history to happen somewhere else. Death entered the farmstead often. Infant mortality, infection, accident, childbirth, violence, famine, and disease were never far away. Burial customs varied widely, from cremation to inhumation, from simple graves to elaborate monuments, from Christian cemeteries to older rites beneath mounds or stones. Grave goods can suggest belief, but never explain it fully. A bead at the neck, a knife at the belt, a horse beside the dead, a boat used as a grave. Each object gestures toward a mental universe only partly recoverable. Still, the farm endured. It endured through inheritance, marriage, oath, memory, and work. It endured because someone rose in the dark to tend animals, because someone saved seed, because someone repaired the roof, because someone remembered which field flooded, which path froze first, which cow gave good milk, which neighbor could be trusted, which insult could be ignored, and which one could not. In this turf-roofed world, the Viking Age was made day by day, not only in raids, not only in royal ambition, not only in distant voyages toward silver and fame. It was made in smoke, wool, bone, grain, milk, iron, mud, and firelight. It was made by people whose names are mostly lost, though their fingerprints remain in clay, soot, stitching, and soil. And still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Beneath the grass lie the floors where they slept. Beneath the midden lie the meals they shared. Beneath collapsed walls lie the outlines of rooms where love, hunger, anger, birth, illness, laughter, and mourning once moved like weather. The longhouse is silent now, but in the mind's ear, if we listen carefully, the hearth still cracks. The ship waits at the edge of the shore like a living thing. Its hull rests on rollers above the tide line, dark with tar, curved with purpose, smelling of resin, timber, salt, wool, and iron. Men move around it in the half-light, tightening ropes, lifting cargo, checking oars, speaking little. A woman stands nearby with a cloak wrapped against the wind, watching a son, a brother, a husband, or a debtor prepare to leave. Dogs bark from the farm track. Gulls wheel above the strand. The water beyond is restless, gray, and open. In the Viking world, the sea was not a border. It was a road. To many settled peoples of medieval Europe, the sea could seem like an ending, a dangerous emptiness beyond the safety of fields, walls, and roads. But to the people of Scandinavia, raised among fjords, islands, lakes, rivers, sounds, skerries, and coasts, water was movement. Water connected what land divided. It allowed a farm boy from western Norway to reach an Irish harbor, a trader from Sweden to pass deep into eastern river systems, a chieftain from Denmark to cross toward England with warriors at his back, and a settler from Iceland to vanish into the Western Ocean. The longship was not merely transport. It was an answer to geography. Its genius lay not in one feature, but in the marriage of many. The planks were overlapped in clinker fashion. each strake fastened to the next, creating a hull both strong and flexible. It could bend slightly with the force of the sea rather than shatter against it. The shallow draft allowed it to slide into rivers, cross sandbanks, approach beaches, and appear where deeper vessels could not go. Oars gave control when wind failed. A square sail gave speed when the weather favored it. The hull was narrow, elegant, swift, and practical. It was at once a weapon, a cargo carrier, a bridge, and a declaration. Archaeology has recovered Viking ships from burial mounds, harbors, bogs, channels, and coastal sites, and each one shows a technical intelligence grounded in experience. These vessels were not primitive experiments. They were refined machines built by people who understood timber, balance, current, stress, wind, repair, and risk. Lithic analysis belongs to the older stone worlds of deep prehistory. But in the Viking Age, the same spirit of material knowledge lived in woodworking, iron riveting, rope making, sail production, and the practiced eye of shipwrights who could read a tree as a future hull. A tree was not simply cut, it was chosen. The ship began in the forest, with timber selected for shape, strength, and grain. Oak was prized where available, though local resources mattered. Curved branches and natural forms became knees, ribs, and stems. Wood was split, shaped, joined, and sealed. Iron rivets fastened planks. Animal hair, wool, moss, or fibers could be used with tar for caulking. Every part of the vessel carried the memory of skilled hands. Before a sail ever filled with wind, the ship had already gathered forest, forge, pasture, and household labor into one body. And then there was the sail. A sail was a massive achievement. Wool had to be grown on sheep, shorn, cleaned, spun, woven, treated, and maintained. The cloth needed strength enough to endure salt wind and sudden weather. The image of a dragon ship cutting through the dawn often hides the thousands of hours of textile labor that made the voyage possible. Without spinning and weaving, there could be no oceanic reach, no sudden fleets on foreign coasts, no crossing to Iceland, Greenland, or the far western lands. At sea, skill mattered as much as courage. Navigation in the Viking world was not guesswork performed by reckless men trusting only fate. It was a discipline of observation. Sailors watched wind direction, swell patterns, cloud formations, stars, birds, whales, watercolor, sea temperature, and the smell of land. They learned how weather behaved around known coasts, how currents pulled between islands, how fog changed sound, how birds moved near nesting grounds, and how the horizon itself could betray distance. Knowledge lived in memory, body, and story. It passed from old sailors to young ones through practice, warning, and survival. A voyage began with calculation. How much food could be carried? How many men? How much water? What cargo? What weapons? Which season? Which route? Which lord or partner financed the journey? Was the purpose trade, settlement, tribute, raiding, exploration, service, exile, or revenge? A ship leaving shore carried more than bodies. It carried intent, and intent could change. A trading voyage might turn violent if opportunity appeared. A raiding party might bargain if resistance looked costly. A settler ship might become a rescue vessel, a pirate ship, a funeral ship, or a floating court of law. The Viking world rarely separated cleanly into categories. A man could be farmer in spring, sailor in summer, raider in autumn, and storyteller in winter. The same ship could carry wool, weapons, slaves, silver, timber, walrus ivory, amber, hides, grain, and rumor. The sight of these vessels on the horizon could mean different things depending on where one stood. To a coastal monastery, it might mean terror, bells ringing, doors barred, treasure hidden too late, manuscripts dropped in panic, smoke rising where sacred buildings had stood. The longship's speed made it psychologically devastating. It brought violence without warning, then vanished before armies could gather. To a market town, it might mean opportunity, foreign goods, silver weights, furs, honey, wax, fine cloth, glass beads, ivory, iron, gossip from river routes, royal courts, distant wars, and strange ports. The same sail that frightened one shore enriched another. To a young Scandinavian with little inheritance, it might mean possibility. Land was limited. Ambition was not. A voyage could make a name. It could bring wealth, followers, marriage prospects, weapons, honor, and stories. It could also bring drowning, disease, enslavement, betrayal, or a grave in soil no ancestor had known. The ship was freedom, but never safety. Ship burials reveal the spiritual weight of vessels in northern imagination. In some graves, boats carried the dead as if death itself were another crossing. The vessel became a chamber, a symbol, a memory of status, movement, and identity. Weapons, animals, tools, ornaments, food, and personal objects might accompany the dead into silence. Radiocarbon dating fixes such burials within human chronology, but not within human feeling. The question remains answerless, adrift to ponder. Did they believe the dead sailed onward? Did the ship honor life lived across water? Did it display the family's power to those still breathing? Perhaps all of these. Perhaps more. The ship also reshaped politics. A ruler who could command ships could command distance. He could gather warriors from scattered coasts, strike enemies, protect trade, collect tribute, and impose presence across water. Fleets turned ambition into geography. They allowed kings to think beyond local valleys and islands. They helped create larger realms from smaller loyalties. The sea, once a path for independent adventurers and chieftains, became a stage for royal power. Yet even the greatest fleet depended upon countless ordinary acts. Someone felled the tree. Someone smelted the iron. Someone twisted rope. Someone made the sail. Someone packed dried fish. Someone repaired the oar. Someone watched the weather. Someone remembered the shoal where another ship had broken. The Viking ship was not the creation of isolated heroes. It was a communal technology, made possible by entire landscapes of knowledge. Picture it now. Leaving the shore, the hull slides down greased rollers. Men push. Water touches wood. The ship lifts slightly, alive beneath their hands. Oars are shipped. Cargo is settled. The sail waits, bundled and silent. Those on shore raise hands, or do not. Words are spoken that the wind tears apart. The first strokes bite into the water. The land begins to loosen its hold. Soon, the farmstead becomes small. Then, the people become marks. Then, the shore becomes a line. Ahead lies weather, wealth, violence, trade, hunger, fame, and the enormous uncertainty of the open world. Behind lies smoke from the hearth, fields needing work, graves of kin, and the memory of a place that may never be seen again. The longship moves into the swell. The sea road opens, and the world bends around its keel. The hearth burns low, and in the red heart of the embers, the world is full of watchers. Outside the longhouse, wind presses against timber and turf. Snow gathers in the yard. The animals shift in their stalls, breathing clouds into the cold. Inside, faces glow and vanish as flame rises and falls. Someone speaks a name that belongs to the unseen. Someone touches a charm at the neck. Someone stares into the fire as though the answer to illness, weather, hunger, luck, or death might be hidden there. In the Viking world, belief was not a quiet corner of life. It was everywhere. It moved through the field when seed was cast into soil. It stood beside the mother in childbirth. It breathed in the storm that shattered boats and stripped roofs. It lived in dreams, omens, animal behavior, weather signs, sacred trees, burial mounds, weapons, wells, feasts, and family memory. The old northern cosmos was not divided neatly between the physical and the spiritual. The world itself was alive with presence, gods, spirits, ancestors, land beings, fate, luck, and the dead pressed close to human affairs. To modern eyes, this can seem strange. Yet for those who lived by uncertain harvests, fragile ships, dangerous childbirth, violent feuds, and sudden disease, the universe did not feel empty. It felt charged. A good season might be more than weather. A failed voyage might be more than bad seamanship. A dream might be warning. A raven might be message. A mound might not be only a grave, but a place where the old power of a family remained rooted in the earth. The gods of the north were not gentle abstractions. They were mighty, flawed, dangerous, cunning, passionate, and doomed. They drank, fought, desired, grieved, deceived, suffered, and waited for an end even they could not escape. This made them strangely close to mortals. They were not beyond fate. They too stood within it. In such a world, courage did not mean believing one would always win. Courage meant acting when all things, even gods, moved toward darkness. That idea mattered. A farmer could understand it while watching frost threaten a field. A sailor could understand it when waves rose higher than the gunwale. A warrior could understand it while tightening his grip before battle. A mother could understand it at the bedside of a fevered child. Human life was not secure. It never had been. The old stories did not deny that. They gave shape to it. Ritual made uncertainty bearable. A sacrifice might be made before a voyage, a feast, a harvest, a birth, a battle, or the sealing of an oath. Animals could be killed, and their blood used in sacred contexts. Food and drink could be offered. Weapons might be bent or broken and given to water or earth. Objects could be placed in graves, wells, bogs, or beneath thresholds. Words were spoken, gestures performed, fires lit, cups raised, and bonds renewed between the living, the dead, the divine, and the land. Archaeology can find traces of ritual, but rarely the whole ritual itself. It can reveal bones cut in unusual ways, deposits placed with care, amulets worn close to the body, temples suggested by building remains, cultic objects, graves arranged with symbolic intent, and landscapes shaped by repeated acts of devotion. Stratigraphic excavation may show that a place was visited across generations. Radiocarbon dating may reveal the span of use. Isotope analysis may tell us where the animals came from. Yet the words spoken over the offering are gone. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. One of the most famous symbols of this old world is the hammer pendant, worn by some as a sign of protection, identity, or divine connection. Small enough to rest against the chest, It carried a universe of meaning. In a time when crosses were spreading across the north, such pendants could also become declarations, not always of resistance in a simple sense, but of belonging, memory, and allegiance to an older order of power. The arrival of Christianity did not erase the old gods in a single clean stroke. The change was slower, stranger, and more human. Some conversions were political, tied to kingship, diplomacy, marriage, trade, and alliance. Some were sincere spiritual transformations. Some were pragmatic accommodations. Some may have been barely understood at first, folded into existing categories of power. To a person raised among many divine beings, one more holy figure did not necessarily require the immediate abandonment of all others. Cross and hammer could exist in the same cultural landscape. A chieftain might accept baptism to secure support from a Christian king. A trader might wear a cross in a Christian market and keep older charms at home. A family might bury one relative with grave goods and another in a churchyard. A poet might preserve stories of pagan gods while living in a Christian society. The mind does not always change as quickly as law, and kings understood the power of belief. Christianity brought more than theology. It brought writing, bishops, churches, international legitimacy, new forms of royal ceremony, and connection to the wider Christian kingdoms of Europe. A king who stood with the church could claim not merely strength, but sacred authority of a new kind. He could use priests as administrators, churches as centers of influence, and Christian identity as a tool to bind people across regions. Yet the older sacred landscape did not vanish. Holy places may have been reinterpreted. Feasts continued under new names. Seasonal gatherings shifted meaning. Stories were retold. Local customs survived under Christian language. Memory is stubborn, especially in rural places where the land itself carries ancestral weight. A grove cut down does not remove the fear once felt there. A mound beside a farm does not become ordinary just because a priest says the old ways are false. Burial offers one of the clearest windows into this transformation. Older Viking Age graves might include weapons, jewelry, tools, animals, ships, food, gaming pieces, or objects of daily life. The body might be cremated or laid out whole. Graves could be dramatic statements of rank, gender, lineage, travel, and belief. Christian burial gradually emphasized different ideas, often with the body placed in earth without rich grave goods, oriented according to Christian practice, and gathered within cemeteries linked to churches. But the transition was uneven. Some graves mix signals. Some communities changed faster than others. Some objects that appear pagan may have been heirlooms, symbols, or possessions rather than ritual declarations. Some Christian graves still contain traces of older concerns. The dead do not explain themselves. Archaeologists must read carefully, never forcing one object to carry more certainty than it can bear. The dead were powerful in Viking thought. Ancestors could legitimate claims to land. Mounds could mark territory. Burial places could become centers of memory, law, and status. Stories tell of the dead returning, guarding treasure, haunting homes, advising descendants, or needing to be restrained. Whether such stories reflect literal belief, social anxiety, moral teaching, or all of these at once, they reveal a world where death did not end relationship. A grave was not only disposal, it was communication. The living spoke through what they placed with the dead, where they buried them, how they remembered them, and whether they visited, feared, invoked, or ignored them. The body became part of the landscape, and the landscape became part of history. A mound on a ridge could say, "This family has been here. This land has witnesses. This power is old." There were specialists, too. Figures who moved at the edges of ordinary social order. Seeresses, ritual practitioners, healers, poets. And wise people appear in stories and occasional archaeological debates, though the evidence is difficult and often contested. Some graves containing staffs, unusual dress, exotic objects, or symbolic arrangements have been interpreted as belonging to ritual specialists. Yet caution is essential. Not every unusual object proves a magical office. Not every rich female grave belongs to a seeress. The past invites wonder, but it punishes certainty. What we can say is that knowledge had many forms. A smith knew transformation through fire. A sailor knew wind and current. A farmer knew soil and season. A healer knew plants, wounds, and words. A poet knew memory. A ritual specialist may have known how to move minds, bodies, and communities through fear, grief, hope, and expectation. In a world without modern medicine or scientific explanation, such knowledge mattered deeply. Religion was also performance. A feast, a sacrifice, an oath, a funeral, a baptism, a royal conversion. Each made belief visible. People gathered. They watched. They judged. They remembered who stood where, who gave what, who refused, who wept, who laughed, who spoke with authority. The sacred world and the social world were braided together. To challenge a ritual could be to challenge a leader. To accept a ritual could be to enter a new political reality. This is why the conversion of the Viking world wasn't merely a change of prayer. It was a restructuring of time, authority, memory, burial, law, literacy, art, kingship, and identity. The old gods did not simply disappear into smoke. They became stories, warnings, poetic language, carved images, local memories, scholarly puzzles, and eventually symbols for later ages seeking power in the imagined north. The fire sinks lower. In the longhouse, the people sleep or pretend to sleep. Outside, the stars burn above snowfields, roofs, grave mounds, and dark water. Somewhere a cross stands in new earth. Somewhere a hammer rests against a living chest. Somewhere an old story is being told by a voice that already knows the endings, yet tells it anyway because endings are not the same as silence. The Viking world was changing, but in the mind of a person sitting by that hearth in 1000 AD, the universe remained crowded, dangerous, sacred, and alive. And only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. What hidden graves will be opened, what buried charms will be lifted into light, and what lost prayers may still sleep in the northern soil. At the edge of the harbor, the world is weighed in silver. The morning air smells of mud, tar, fish, smoke, wet wool, dung, and seaweed. Boats bump softly against wooden landing stages. Men shout over the creak of ropes and the slap of water. Women move through the market with baskets, keys, knives, beads, and watchful eyes. A child stares at a foreign trader whose clothes are cut differently, whose speech sounds like stones clicking in a stream, whose belt carries a pouch heavy enough to make adults glance twice. This is the Viking world as marketplace, not only the world of raids and burning roofs, but of counting, bargaining, measuring, trusting, cheating, promising, and remembering. Here, violence is still near. A blade may be hidden beneath a cloak. A feud may begin with a disputed price. A slave may stand between barrels of fish and stacks of hides. Yet commerce draws people together who might otherwise remain strangers. It creates temporary peace among those who want profit more than blood. A trading town was a machine of contact. Places such as Hedeby, Birka, Kaupang, Dublin, Ribe, York, and others became points where local produce met distant ambition. Their streets and plots held craft workshops, storage buildings, jetties, houses, animal pens, refuse layers, hearths, wells, and workshops where raw material became wealth. Stratigraphic excavation in such places reveals not the silence of isolated farms, but the dense noise of movement. Layers of dropped beads, broken combs, slag, bones, weights, coins, pins, pottery, glass, antler, leather, and ship fittings tell of lives packed close together around exchange. The Viking economy was not simple coin use in the modern sense. Silver mattered enormously, but often by weight rather than by stamped authority alone. Coins from distant lands could be cut, bent, tested, and treated as metal. Arm rings could become savings worn on the body. Hack silver, chopped fragments of ornaments, ingots, and coins, moved through hands according to weight, purity, and trust. Small balances and weights were tools of power. To weigh accurately was to negotiate reality itself. A scale could decide friendship or anger. In the hand of a trader, tiny weights became instruments of order. Some were shaped with care, decorated, standardized, carried in pouches, and guarded closely. A poor weight could invite suspicion. A dishonest one could bring violence. The market depended on shared expectation, but expectation always needed enforcement, law, reputation, witness, and the threat of retaliation stood behind every bargain. The goods themselves tell of astonishing reach. Amber from the Baltic, furs from forests, walrus ivory from Arctic waters, soapstone vessels, iron tools, whetstones, antler combs, wool cloth, linen, glass beads, weapons, honey, wax, hides, fish, grain, jewelry, timber, slaves, and silver moved across routes that tied the North to the wider medieval world. Some objects traveled so far that they became almost impossible stories in material form. A bead might begin in one world and end in a grave beneath another sky. A coin struck under a distant ruler might be buried beside a Scandinavian farm. A silk fragment might pass through hands that never saw the city where it was woven. The East was especially rich with movement. Rivers carried Scandinavian traders and warriors through lands of forest, marsh, steppe, fortresses, and towns. These routes were not easy roads. Boats had to be rowed, sailed, dragged, repaired, portaged, defended, and sometimes abandoned. Rapids could break hulls. Local powers demanded tribute. Bandits waited. Disease traveled. Yet the rewards were immense. Silver from the Islamic world entered the North in quantities that changed social life, fueled gift-giving, enabled political ambition, and filled hoards that still emerge from fields, islands, and riverbanks. A hoard is a frozen decision. Why was it buried fear storage ritual? A merchant hiding profit before travel, a family protecting wealth during conflict, an offering to powers beneath the earth. A person who died before returning radiocarbon dating may frame the moment. Coin studies may suggest the earliest possible burial date. Soil chemistry may reveal container traces, but the human reason often remains answerless, adrift to ponder. The treasure waits in darkness while generations pass above it, plowing, praying, fighting, forgetting. Trade also carried people, and not all of them traveled freely. Slavery formed a brutal part of the Viking world. Captives taken in raids, wars, and local conflicts could be sold, transported, gifted, exploited, or incorporated into households. They worked farms, served elites, labored in towns, and crossed seas as commodities in human form. Markets were therefore places of wealth and suffering together. The bright bead and the iron shackle belong to the same historical landscape. It is tempting to let silver dazzle the eye, but the moral weight of trade must be held clearly. Prosperity was often built through coercion. A merchant's success might begin with someone else's capture. A town's growth might depend on bodies bought and sold. A chieftain's generosity in the hall might be funded by raids upon distant villages. The Viking world was brilliant, inventive, and connected. It was also harsh, predatory, and unequal. Still, markets created new kinds of life. Craft specialists gathered where customers came. Smiths repaired blades and tools. Bone workers carved combs from antler. Jewelers made brooches, pendants, rings, and fittings. Glass workers shaped beads. Leather workers cut shoes, belts, sheaths, and bags. Textile workers supplied cloth. Shipwrights served the harbor. Brewers, cooks, and sellers of food fed transient populations. These towns were not merely places of exchange, but places of transformation, where raw matter became identity, status, and memory. A comb could be more than grooming. It could signal cleanliness, style, and care. A brooch could fasten clothing while declaring region, wealth, and taste. A sword fitting could make violence beautiful. A bead necklace could bind a person to distant roots of trade and fashion. Material culture was a language worn on the body, held in the hand, buried with the dead, and passed between generations. Markets also carried information. News moved with cargo. A trader arriving from England might speak of kings, wars, coinage, taxes, church wealth, and weak harbors. A man from the East might tell of river tolls, silver supplies, steppe raiders, and imperial demand. A sailor from Iceland might bring stories of land disputes, volcanic fire, settlement hunger, and voyages farther west. Information was itself a kind of treasure. To know where silver flowed, where defenses failed, where famine weakened a region, or where a ruler sought mercenaries could shape fortunes. Language in these places must have been fluid. People bargained through fragments, gestures, interpreters, repeated formulas, and the universal grammar of goods placed in the hand. Trust could form without perfect speech. Suspicion could flourish even with it. The market was an arena where identity stretched. A person might be foreign in one harbor, familiar in another, feared in a third, and welcomed in a fourth because he carried what others wanted. Law tried to hold this world together. Trade required rules, even among people accustomed to violence. Market peace, protected zones, weights, tolls, witnesses, compensation, and local authority all helped keep exchange from collapsing into theft. But law was only as strong as the people willing to enforce it. A town could thrive when rulers protected merchants. It could suffer when power became predatory. Commerce and kingship grew together, each feeding the other. The harbor at sunset is a theater of endings. Goods are packed away. Fires are lit. Deals are remembered. Debts remain. A slave coughs in the cold near a storage shed. A trader hides silver beneath bedding. A craftswoman counts beads by lamplight. Sailors drink too loudly. Somewhere, a stranger is watched because he asked too many questions. Somewhere a child holds a small broken object from far away and wonders what land made such a thing. beneath later streets, beneath modern towns, beneath fields and shorelines altered by centuries. The debris of these markets still waits. A lost weight, a clipped coin, a burned beam, a bead fallen through floorboards, a fishbone in black soil, a scrap of silk, a human chain link corroded almost beyond recognition. The Viking world was not isolated at the top of Europe. It was entangled with continents. Its harbors were mouths through which the North spoke to the world, and through which the world answered in silver, silk, blood, salt, faith, rumor, and desire. The blade is drawn in public, and everyone understands the danger. Not only the danger of the edge itself, bright and cold in the morning light, but the danger of what it means. A weapon in the hand is never just metal. It is memory, insult, inheritance, threat, pride, debt, and law all gathered into one shining line. Around the men who face each other, the crowd grows still. Someone knows the story. Someone knows the old wound behind the new anger. Someone knows that a single death may not end anything at all. In the Viking world, violence had structure. It was not random chaos. Though chaos always waited nearby, it existed inside a society deeply concerned with honor, reputation, kinship, compensation, oath, and public judgment. Men and women lived within webs of obligation. A person was not only an individual, but a member of a household, a lineage, a district, a following, a name. To harm one person could awaken many others. To insult one person could stain an entire family. To kill one person could open a road of blood that might run for generations. This is why law mattered. The Viking world wasn't lawless. It was intensely legal, though not in the modern sense of courts sealed behind stone walls and distant judges speaking for the state. Law lived in assemblies, in memory, in custom, in public speech, in negotiation, in compensation, and in the authority of men who knew the old formulas. The law thing, the gathering where disputes were heard and decisions announced, was one of the great institutions of Northern society. It brought free people together to settle quarrels, declare rights, arrange punishments, make alliances, and turn private conflict into public order. A feud was not simply revenge. It was a social process, terrifying because it could be rational. A killing demanded answer. That answer might be another killing, or payment, or exile, or settlement, or marriage alliance, or public humiliation, or a carefully staged reconciliation. Blood money could cool anger, but only if honor allowed it. Too little compensation invited contempt. Too much pride invited catastrophe. The measure of a life became a matter of status, circumstance, witnesses, and negotiation. Every free person needed a reputation strong enough to defend. Honor was not vanity. It was social survival. In a world where centralized authority remained limited, reputation helped protect property, family, and future. A man known as cowardly might lose allies. A woman known as shrewd and strong might preserve a household in crisis. A chieftain known as generous attracted followers. A leader known as weak invited betrayal. Words could wound because words could change how others acted toward you. Insults were dangerous. Mockery, accusations of cowardice, sexual dishonor, oath-breaking, sorcery, betrayal, or weakness could demand public response. Silence might be read as acceptance, yet response could escalate beyond control. The culture valued restraint as well as courage, though the stories often remember the dramatic moment when restraint fails. The wisest person was not always the quickest to strike. Sometimes greatness lay in knowing when anger served an enemy. Weapons were objects of practical use and symbolic force. The sword was prestigious, expensive, and often named in poetry. It could pass through generations, carrying the fame of those who had wielded it. Pattern-welded blades, decorated hilts, inlaid fittings, and carefully made scabbards turned weaponry into art. Spears were common and deadly, used in hunting, war, and ritual. Axes varied from working tools to specialized weapons capable of brutal effect. Bows mattered too, though they receive less glory in heroic imagination than swords and axes. A shield was not a decorative circle on the wall. It was life, wooden, iron-bossed, sometimes painted, often repaired. It absorbed impact, closed formations, protected the body, and marked identity. In battle, the shield wall was both technique and trust. To stand beside another person with shields overlapping required discipline, nerve, and confidence that the line would hold. Panic could be fatal. The strength of the individual mattered, but the strength of the group mattered more. War in the Viking world could take many forms. There were raids launched for plunder, speed, and shock. There were local disputes between rival chiefs. There were royal campaigns to seize land, tribute, or submission. There were mercenary ventures in foreign service. There were sea battles, ambushes, sieges, farm attacks, legal killings, and ritualized duels. The same society that created law also accepted violence as a normal instrument of power. Raiding required intelligence. Targets were chosen. Tides mattered. Weather mattered. Local politics mattered. Monasteries, estates, towns, and river settlements offered different risks and rewards. A successful raid needed speed, discipline, intimidation, and exit. Men who could cross water swiftly, strike before defenses gathered, and leave with portable wealth held an advantage that terrified coastal Europe. But raiding was not always easy profit. Defenders learned. Fortifications improved. Kings organized resistance. A failed attack could leave bodies in mud far from home. Professional warriors existed, but most fighting men were also something else. Farmers, sailors, traders, sons, husbands, debtors, clients, landholders, and adventurers could all become armed men when opportunity or obligation demanded it. A retinue around a powerful leader might form the hardened core of military strength. These followers expected reward: silver, weapons, food, land, fame, and proximity to power kept them loyal, until better offers appeared or confidence failed. Gift-giving was political technology. A lord who gave rings, swords, feasts, and honor did not merely display wealth, he manufactured loyalty. The receiver accepted not only an object, but an obligation. The hall glittering with arm rings and drinking horns was not just a place of pleasure. It was where power renewed itself through generosity, memory, and expectation. A stingy leader was in danger. A generous leader could become the center of a world. But generosity needed fuel. War could supply it. Trade could supply it. Tribute could supply it. Marriage could supply it. Control of markets, ships, and fertile land could supply it. The warrior ethos cannot be separated from economics. Behind the heroic poem lies the calculation of resources. Behind the oath lies the question of payment. Behind the famous blade lies the labor of miners, charcoal burners, smiths, merchants, and those who fed them. Archaeology finds violence in bone, cut marks, healed fractures, embedded weapon points, skull trauma, mass graves, decapitations, and defensive wounds speak in a language older than writing. Osteological analysis can show injuries survived and injuries that ended life. Some skeletons reveal people accustomed to hard labor and repeated trauma. Others show sudden slaughter. Genomic data can sometimes identify kinship among the dead, or reveal that a group buried together came from varied ancestries. The battlefield and the execution site both become archives. Yet the evidence must be read carefully. A weapon in a grave does not prove the dead person lived as a warrior. A healed wound does not explain the fight that caused it. A mass burial may belong to battle, punishment, massacre, disease, or ritual treatment. The past resists easy labels. Still, the bones make one thing clear. This was a world where violence touched bodies directly, and where social order had to be built in full knowledge of that fact. Law tried to prevent endless blood. Assemblies transformed private rage into public settlement. Witnesses mattered. Oaths mattered. Compensation schedules mattered. Outlawry could strip a person of protection, making them vulnerable to lawful killing. Exile could remove danger from the community. Mediation could preserve families from ruin. The legal culture was not soft. It was a hard instrument built for a hard world. At the assembly, words became weapons of another kind. A skilled speaker could save a household or doom it. Genealogies were recited. Grievances unfolded. Witnesses stepped forward. Men stood with supporters visible behind them. The crowd watched not only the case, but the balance of power. Justice and politics were intertwined. The right argument might fail if spoken by the weak. The wrong argument might prevail if backed by enough spears. Yet even powerful men needed legitimacy. Public opinion mattered because every settlement needed people to accept it. Women could shape conflict in ways both direct and indirect. They might urge vengeance, counsel peace, preserve memory of wrongs, negotiate marriages, manage estates while men fought, or become targets and agents within feud politics. Saga literature, though written later and shaped by literary art, remembers women as formidable voices in matters of honor. Archaeology cannot always recover speech, but it can recover status, wealth, mobility, and the material conditions that made influence possible. There is no peaceful golden north hidden behind the violence, nor is there only brutality. The Viking world held both law and blood because human societies often build order from the very forces that threaten to destroy them. Honor could protect dignity. It could also demand murder. Kinship could sustain life. It could also trap families in inherited hatred. Courage could save a community. It could also feed vanity and ruin. The public blade lowers, or it strikes. The crowd exhales, or cries out. Somewhere a settlement is reached and the dead are paid for in silver, livestock, land, and bitter silence. Somewhere no settlement is enough, and another household begins sharpening iron. Somewhere a young man learns that fame has a price. Somewhere an old woman remembers the first insult and knows that all this blood began with words. The Viking world understood that peace was not the absence of violence. Peace was violence restrained, priced, witnessed, threatened, negotiated, and sometimes sanctified by law. And beneath the green fields, beneath later churches, beneath the soil of farms and former assembly grounds, the bones still keep their testimony. A key hangs at the belt, and with it hangs authority. It is small enough to miss in the shimmer of a crowded hall, yet heavy with meaning. Iron or bronze, plain or finely made. It rests against clothing that has been spun, woven, dyed, mended, and fastened with care. It opens locked chests, storerooms, cupboards, and guarded spaces where food, cloth, tools, valuables, and memory are kept, in a world where survival depends on what can be stored, protected, distributed, and denied. The keeper of the key is never merely keeping doors. The Viking world was not a simple stage of men acting and women watching. It was a layered society in which power moved through land, blood, marriage, labor, property, ritual, household management, trade, memory, and speech. Men often dominated public violence and formal leadership, but women shaped the structures that made such leadership possible. They managed farms, controlled resources, raised children, preserved kinship, produced textiles, arranged alliances, inherited property in certain contexts, and stood at the center of domestic economies that were anything but small. A household could not function without women's labor. The romantic image of the warrior sailing away hides a harsher truth. When ships left, someone had to keep the farm alive. Fields did not wait for glory. Cows did not milk themselves. Children did not raise themselves. Cloth did not appear from air. Grain did not grind itself into meal. Houses did not repair their own roofs. The absence of men could increase the authority of those who remained. And in a society of seasonal movement, women often carried enormous responsibility. Textile production alone was one of the great engines of the Viking Age. Wool had to be sorted, cleaned, combed, spun into thread, dyed, woven on looms, cut, stitched, patched, and transformed into clothing, blankets, sails, bags, wall hangings, tents, and trade goods. The work was slow, skilled, and constant. A sail for a seagoing vessel represented not days, but immense accumulations of labor. Without women's textile work, ships would remain trapped close to shore. Warriors would lack clothing, traders would lack goods, and households would freeze. In the archaeological record, this world appears through spindle whorls, loom weights, needles, shears, weaving swords, textile fragments, dye traces, and impressions preserved against metal or in damp soil. These are not lesser objects. They are evidence of expertise. Each spindle whorl is a small wheel of time. Each loom weight carries the invisible rhythm of hands and footwork. Each scrap of cloth is a fossil of patience. Women also shaped identity through dress, oval brooches, beads, pendants, chains, belts, rings, and pins did not merely decorate the body. They made status visible. They declared region, family wealth, fashion, age, marital position, religious affiliation, and personal taste. A woman walking through a market or hall carried information on her body: silver at the chest, glass at the throat, keys at the waist, and fine cloth at the shoulder could speak before her mouth opened. Some women traveled. Isotope analysis and genomic data have shown patterns of movement that complicate older assumptions about fixed, local lives. Marriage could move a woman between regions. Trade could draw people across seas. Enslavement could tear people from home. Settlement in Iceland, Greenland, England, Ireland, and beyond required women as well as men. Colonization was not only the planting of weapons in new soil, it was childbirth, cooking, inheritance, dairy work, burial, language, and the carrying of memory into unfamiliar landscapes. A settlement without women was a camp. A settlement with women, children, animals, seed, tools, law, and graves became a society. Queens and elite women could stand near the blazing center of politics. Marriage alliances linked ruling families, softened conflicts, created claims, and bound territories together. A royal woman might serve as diplomatic bridge, estate manager, patron of Christianity, mother of heirs, guardian of dynastic memory, or political actor during crisis. In a world where bloodlines mattered, the womb was political. To bear a child was not merely private. It could alter inheritance, loyalty, war, and succession, yet power was not limited to queens. A widow could hold property and command respect, especially if she controlled land, wealth, or sons. A mother could influence vengeance or settlement. A woman of a leading household could receive guests, distribute food, guard honor, remember insults, and decide when silence was wise or deadly. Power often lived in the ability to make others act, and by that measure, many women mattered deeply. Graves have become one of the great battlegrounds of interpretation. For generations, archaeologists often assumed that weapons meant male and jewelry meant female. Modern analysis has challenged that habit. Osteological study, ancient DNA, and more careful excavation have revealed that the past is more complicated than old categories allowed. Some graves with weapons have belonged to women. Some graves without weapons have belonged to men. Some remains are too fragmentary for certainty. Some burials may represent ritual roles, symbolic identities, inherited objects, or unusual social positions. The famous question of female warriors lies in this uncertainty. Were there women who fought? Almost certainly, in some circumstances, women could and did use violence, defend homes, and perhaps join armed conflict. Were shield maidens common professional warriors across the Viking world? The evidence is far more difficult. Poetry, legend, later saga tradition, and a handful of striking graves invite fascination. But fascination is not proof by itself. The honest answer stands between denial and fantasy. The Viking world allowed more variation than older scholarship imagined. Yet not every weapon grave can be made into a modern dream. Still, the debate itself is valuable. It reveals how the present can distort the past. Earlier scholars often erased women from power. Modern audiences sometimes reshape them into warriors because armed power is the easiest kind to recognize. But a woman does not need a sword to matter. The loom, the key, the legal claim, the marriage alliance, the memory of a feud, the management of stores, the raising of heirs, the command of a farm, and the performance of ritual could all carry force. There were also women at the edges of ordinary life, figures of wonder and unease. Stories speak of seeresses, wise women, healers, dream interpreters, and practitioners of strange knowledge. Some graves containing staffs, unusual dress, imported goods, or symbolic arrangements have been linked to ritual specialists, though caution must guide every interpretation. A staff may mean ritual authority, or status, or something lost to us. A strange burial may mark reverence, fear, foreignness, illness, craft, or a story we cannot recover. Still, it is clear that certain forms of knowledge were associated with women: birth, healing, household protection, prophecy, fertility, memory. And the unseen world often drew women close to the sacred. In a society where the boundary between practical and magical knowledge was not drawn as sharply as in modern thought, the healer and the ritual specialist could occupy overlapping ground. Plants, words, touch, timing, and belief might all belong to the same act. But not every woman held power. Many endured hardship, dependence, childbirth danger, violence, poverty, grief, and unfreedom. Enslaved women suffered labor, sexual exploitation, displacement, sale, and social invisibility. Their lives are among the hardest to recover precisely because the powerful rarely preserved their names. Yet they were there, cooking, carrying, weaving, nursing, cleaning, serving, and surviving as best they could within a world that treated them as property. The Viking world, like all human worlds, contained contradiction. It could honor a woman with keys and silver while denying freedom to another. It could remember a queen while forgetting the thrall who dressed her. It could praise a mother's wisdom while ignoring the pain of childbirth that killed so many. It could place fine beads in one grave and leave another body with almost nothing. Power was real, but unevenly given. At evening, inside the hall, a woman moves through firelight. She knows who is hungry, who is drunk, who is angry, who has lied, who has come seeking marriage, who has come seeking land, who has come seeking blood. She knows which chest holds silver, which servant cannot be trusted, which child listens too closely, which guest must be honored, and which insult must not pass unmarked. She pours drink. She speaks a few words. Men turn their heads. The key at her belt catches the light. History has too often looked past that glint, searching only for the flash of blades. But the Viking world was also locked, opened, stored, woven, remembered, negotiated, and sustained by women whose names have mostly gone down into the dark earth. And still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden beneath brooches, bones, beads, looms, hearths, and the silent metal teeth of keys. The northern world did not end at the shoreline. It leaned outward, across every gray sea lane, every wind-bitten headland, every river mouth shining beneath cold morning light. There was the possibility of another life, a farm too small to divide, a feud too dangerous to remain near, a debt too heavy to carry at home, a lord too ambitious to serve forever, a rumor of land, a rumor of silver, a rumor of timber, walrus ivory, tribute, weak kings, rich churches, empty valleys, foreign courts, and oceans no ancestor had named. Movement was one of the great signatures of the Viking Age. Not movement as a single invasion, not one wave crashing south from a frozen homeland, but countless journeys made for countless reasons. Some people crossed seas with weapons, some with livestock, some with scales, some with children, some in chains, some left by choice, some were forced, some went for a season and returned with silver, some vanished into new languages, new laws, new gods, and new graves. To the west lay the Atlantic. Iceland rose from that ocean like a land still being made. Fire lived beneath its fields. Glaciers crowned its heights. Rivers ran cold over black stone. Steam rose from the earth. Grasslands opened along coasts and valleys where settlers saw possibility. Norse settlement there required astonishing courage and practical intelligence. People brought animals, tools, seed, memory, law, poetry, and social expectation into a landscape that offered beauty and hardship in equal measure. The first generations in Iceland were not merely explorers standing triumphantly on empty ground. They were colonists building a complete society from imported habits and local reality. Turf houses had to be cut into the land. Hay had to be gathered in a climate that punished carelessness. Livestock had to survive. Driftwood mattered. Iron sources mattered. Fishing mattered. Social order mattered intensely, because a land without an older royal structure still needed law, marriage, inheritance, and mechanisms for containing violence. The Icelandic assembly tradition became one of the most remarkable political developments of the medieval North. In a broad plain beneath open sky, free people gathered to hear law, settle disputes, form alliances, announce decisions, trade, marry, argue, boast, and remember. It was not democracy in any modern sense. Power still belonged unequally to chieftains, households, and influential families. Yet it was a society where public speech, legal memory, and negotiated authority became essential to survival. Law was not carved into a distant palace. It was spoken before the people and anchored in landscape. Farther west lay Greenland. To imagine Norse Greenland is to imagine human stubbornness at the edge of viability. Settlers built farms in the southwest, where brief summers allowed pasture and hay. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, and other animals, hunted seals, pursued walrus, gathered resources, and maintained a European Christian identity in a place of immense distance. Churches rose there. Graves were dug there. Children were born there who had never seen Norway, Iceland, or Denmark, yet belonged to a world tied to them by ships, memory, trade, and faith. Greenland demanded adaptation. The growing season was narrow. Hay was life. A failed summer could echo through winter as animal death and human hunger. Walrus ivory and hides helped connect the settlements to European markets, but ocean crossings were never guaranteed. Pack ice, storms, shifting trade demand, social choices, and environmental strain all shaped life. Archaeology in Greenland, through animal bones, farm ruins, middens, pollen, isotopes, and climate evidence, reveals not a cartoon of doomed arrogance, but a difficult society making choices under pressure. Beyond Greenland lay the Western Ocean. The Norse reached North America around this age of movement, landing in lands of timber, grass, rivers, and people already living there. Their presence was brief compared with later European colonization, but astonishing in significance. It shows that Viking seafarers crossed the North Atlantic centuries before Columbus, not as mythic supermen, but as skilled navigators using ships, experience, courage, and desperate calculation. They found new shores. They cut timber. They encountered indigenous peoples. They did not build a lasting colony there. Why did they not remain? Perhaps the distance was too great. Perhaps the population base was too small. Perhaps conflict with local peoples made settlement too dangerous. Perhaps the economic reward did not justify the cost. Perhaps Greenland itself was too fragile a platform from which to support Western expansion. The answer is not a single dramatic failure, but a convergence of limits. The Western land was known, touched, and remembered, then left to story, soil, and silence. To the south and west, the Viking world entered older kingdoms. In Ireland, Norse fleets became more than raiders. They founded and developed towns, most famously Dublin, which grew into a major center of trade, power, slavery, and cultural exchange. Irish and Norse worlds fought, married, traded, borrowed, and reshaped each other. The old image of simple invader and victim cannot hold the full complexity. Over generations, identities blended. A person might carry Norse ancestry, Irish alliances, Christian belief, maritime wealth, and local political ambition all at once. In England, Scandinavian settlement transformed whole regions. Fields, towns, law, language, coinage, and lordship absorbed northern influence. Place names still preserve echoes of settlement. Words entered speech. Families intermarried. Armies became communities. Raiders became landholders. Kings fought, paid, recruited, betrayed, and sometimes ruled over them. The line between foreigner and local blurred with time, as it always does when children are born into disputed lands and grow up calling them home. York became one of the great urban centers of this mixed world. Craft, coinage, trade, ecclesiastical life, royal ambition, and Scandinavian influence met in its streets. Archaeological layers reveal leather shoes, wooden buildings, metalworking, textiles, imported goods, animal bones, human waste, and all the stubborn intimacy of city life. A town is not an idea. It is smell, mud, noise, labor, law, hunger, and opportunity packed into narrow space. In such places, the Viking world became urban, Christian, commercial, and hybrid. In Francia, northern raiders became something stranger still. They became Normans. Land granted to Scandinavian leaders along the lower Seine became the seed of a new political identity. Within generations, the descendants of raiders adopted the local language, Christianity, continental styles of warfare, aristocratic culture, and new ambitions. Yet memory of northern origin remained useful, sharpened into prestige when needed. The Norman transformation is one of history's great examples of cultural speed. A warband could become a duchy. A foreign elite could become native. A frontier could become a launchpad for conquests far beyond its first borders. To the east, the rivers opened another universe. Scandinavian traders and warriors moved through the waterways that led toward the Baltic, the lands of the Rus, the Black Sea, and the Caspian. They carried furs, wax, honey, slaves, swords, beads, and ambition. They encountered Slavic, Finnic, Turkic, Byzantine, Islamic, and other worlds, fortified centers, river ports, tribute systems, and princely courts emerged from these tangled networks. Identity here was fluid, layered, and constantly remade. Some northern men entered the service of the Byzantine emperors. Imagine them in Constantinople, that vast imperial city of stone, gold, incense, ceremony, and political danger. Men who had known timber halls and northern harbors stood beneath domes, beside mosaics, near palaces whose wealth must have seemed almost unreal. As guards, mercenaries, and adventurers, they sold strength to one of the most sophisticated states on earth. The Viking world did not merely raid civilization from outside. It served inside its courts. Every direction changed those who traveled. A man returning from the east might carry silver, silk, foreign weapons, scars, and stories of cities beyond imagining. A woman settling in Iceland might carry Norwegian songs into a new landscape where her descendants would speak them differently. A child born in Dublin to a mixed household might inherit more than one world. A Greenland farmer might pray in a Christian church while watching ice decide the fate of a harvest. A trader in York might sell goods shaped by hands from half a continent away. Movement made identity unstable. That instability is one of the great lessons of the Viking Age. The people we call Vikings were not sealed inside a single ethnicity, nation, or stereotype. They were part of networks. They absorbed and were absorbed. They destroyed and created. They carried language outward and brought foreign ideas home. They enslaved others and sometimes became strangers themselves. They could be pagan, Christian, mixed, converted, resistant, opportunistic, sincere, or uncertain. Genomic data has deepened this picture. Ancient DNA has shown that Viking Age populations were diverse and mobile, with ancestry moving across seas and regions in ways that challenge older nationalist myths. Archaeology, place names, isotopes, burial customs, and material culture all tell the same wider truth. The Viking world was not a pure northern essence expanding into emptiness. It was a storm of contact, collision, adaptation, and exchange. The ship arrives in a foreign harbor. No one there sees a category in a textbook. They see men, women, goods, weapons, animals, captives, debts, accents, smells, clothing, and possibilities. They see danger. They see profit. They see future neighbors, enemies, spouses, rulers, servants, customers, and rivals. History is made in that uncertainty, and somewhere, beneath a churchyard in Greenland, beneath a street in York, beneath a farm in Iceland, beneath a riverbank in the east, beneath the old harbor mud of Dublin, the evidence remains. A bead, a bone, a coin, a broken comb, a burial with ancestry written in the body and identity written in objects. The Viking world stretched across astonishing distances. But it was never only about distance. It was about transformation. Every journey remade the traveler. Every settlement remade the land. Every contact remade the meaning of home. And over the cold waters, the ships kept moving. A king stands in a hall, and the room is no longer only a room. It becomes a map. Every bench holds a faction. Every cup carries expectation. Every gift given from the high seat travels farther than the hand that offers it. A sword placed across a warrior's palms is not merely a reward. It is a promise made visible. A ring of silver is not merely wealth. It is loyalty hardened into metal. A feast is not merely food. It is government before government has learned to call itself by that name. Around the year 1000, the Viking world was changing shape. Power that had once moved through chieftains, local magnates, sea kings, war leaders, and household alliances began to gather into larger forms. Kingdoms did not appear fully formed like mountains rising overnight. They were built slowly, violently, unevenly, and often uncertainly. A ruler might claim a land long before every valley, island, harbor, and farm accepted the claim. Royal authority was not a fact simply because a king declared it. It had to be performed, enforced, witnessed, believed, resisted, and performed again. Kingship in the North had deep roots, but its character shifted in this age. The older world allowed many powerful men to behave almost like kings in miniature. A chieftain with ships, followers, land, wealth, and ritual authority could dominate a district. A successful war leader could gather men for raiding and tribute. A family with ancestral prestige could claim influence across generations. But the emerging kings sought something wider. They wanted territory, taxation, church support, law, coinage, towns, and more stable command over violence. This was not merely ambition. It was a new machinery of rule. Ships had made distance negotiable. Trade had concentrated wealth. Christianity had offered international legitimacy and literate administration. Towns had created taxable centers. Coinage made royal authority small enough to pass from hand to hand. Law codes and assemblies could be drawn into broader systems. Fortifications and fleets could make resistance costly. Slowly, the North began to move from a world of competing local powers toward kingdoms that could endure beyond the charisma of one man. Yet the process was never clean. A king might be baptized, but many of his supporters might still think in older sacred patterns. A ruler might issue coins, but silver by weight might continue to matter. A church might stand beside a hall still filled with old poetry. A royal law might reach one district and fail in another. The map of power was patched, negotiated, and contested. Authority spread like frost, touching some places first, leaving others resistant beneath shadow. Christianity became one of the strongest tools in this transformation. For kings, the church offered more than salvation. It offered sacred kingship, ceremony, written memory, clerical advisors, contact with powerful Christian rulers, and a language of legitimacy that could rise above local kinship. A king who claimed divine favor could present opposition not merely as rebellion against a man, but as resistance to a holy order. Churches became places where royal power could be proclaimed, recorded, and sanctified. But the church was not simply a royal servant. It had its own ambitions, laws, networks, wealth, and authority. Bishops, priests, missionaries, and monastic communities could support kings, challenge kings, shape moral expectations, and connect northern societies to the wider Christian world. The adoption of Christianity pulled Scandinavia more tightly into Europe's diplomatic and ideological web. Marriage alliances, treaties, literacy, saints' cults, relics, church building, and reform all entered the political bloodstream. Conversion also changed time, the week, the feast day, the fast, the saint's day, the church calendar, the rhythm of baptism, marriage, confession, burial, and liturgical celebration altered how communities organized memory. Older seasonal rites did not simply vanish, but new sacred structures increasingly framed public life. The dead moved from mounds and varied grave traditions toward churchyards. The written word began to compete with oral memory. A society that once held law in recited tradition began to set more authority into manuscript, inscription, and charter. Coinage was another quiet revolution. A coin is small, but it carries an enormous idea. It says that authority can mark metal and make that mark meaningful. It says that trust can be stamped. It says that a ruler's name or image can travel far beyond his body. In a world long accustomed to weighing silver, minted coinage helped royal power enter markets, taxes, payments, fines, and gifts. Every coin could become a little announcement of rule. The growth of towns strengthened kings. A dispersed rural society is hard to control. People hidden in valleys, islands, forests, and scattered farms can resist, ignore, or negotiate with distant authority. Towns, by contrast, gather wealth into visible places. They create tolls, markets, workshops, mints, churches, courts, and harbor dues. They invite protection and surveillance at the same time. A king who controls towns controls choke points in the flow of goods, silver, people, and news. War changed as power centralized. The independent raiding bands of earlier generations did not vanish at once, but larger royal armies and fleets became increasingly important. Military violence could be organized toward state building, forts, ships, levies, retinues, and tribute systems allowed rulers to command more than temporary expeditions. A warrior who once sought fortune through private raiding might now serve a king, receive land, defend a town, enforce tribute, or die in a campaign whose purpose was royal consolidation rather than personal plunder. This shift threatened older elites. Local chieftains did not always welcome kings who demanded obedience, taxes, conversion, or military service. Some resisted openly, Others joined the royal project and became its beneficiaries. The clever survived by adapting. A family that once ruled a district through ancestral prestige might accept Christian titles, serve at court, marry into royal networks, donate land to churches, and transform older authority into aristocratic power beneath a king. For ordinary farmers, centralization could feel distant until it arrived at the door. A new tax, a demand for ships, a summons to military service, a church tithe, a royal official, a change in law, a prohibition against older rituals, a market toll, a king's coin, a bishop's claim. These were not abstract changes. They touched grain stores, livestock, labor, inheritance, burial, and the right to settle disputes locally. Kingdoms were built not only in battles, but in the steady taking of small freedoms into larger systems. The older assembly traditions also changed. Kings needed law, but law could also restrain them. Assemblies gave legitimacy because they made rule public. A decision accepted by leading men and free farmers could travel farther than a command imposed by force alone. Yet royal power worked to shape who spoke, what was recorded, which customs survived, and how disputes were judged. Law became a battleground where old local rights met expanding royal authority. The great irony of the Viking Age is that the very energies that had sent ships outward helped dissolve the conditions that made the classic Viking raider possible. Wealth from abroad strengthened rulers. Trade towns invited regulation. Christian legitimacy elevated kings. Foreign models of monarchy provided examples. Warfare grew more organized. Coastal defenses improved in target regions. Raiding became harder, less independent, and more political. The free-ranging bands of the earlier age increasingly gave way to armies, fleets, taxation, diplomacy, and conquest under rulers with broader ambitions. The storm did not stop. It became a state in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The paths toward monarchy differed, shaped by geography, local elites, outside pressures, and the success or failure of particular rulers. Denmark, with its position near continental Europe and the Baltic, developed strong links with trade, warfare, and Christian kingship. Norway, with its fjords and scattered settlements, faced the challenge of binding long coastlines and proud local powers. Sweden's eastern connections and regional diversity created another pattern entirely. There was no single northern script. Royal burial, church building, rune stones, fortresses, ship levies, law codes, and coins all become evidence for this changing order. A rune stone might praise a dead man, proclaim a bridge, mark Christian faith, or declare family status within a new moral landscape. A fortress might reveal the hand of centralized planning. A church might show elite conversion and new ritual geography. A coin hoard might reveal political instability or economic transformation. Archaeology reads these signs not as isolated curiosities, but as pieces of a wider reorganization of society. Still, no king ruled completely. Beyond every center of authority lay stubborn landscapes, mountain farms, forest districts, island communities, borderlands, families who remembered older independence, people who accepted the cross but not the official, people who paid when forced and resisted when possible, people who heard royal claims and measured them against local realities. States are never built only from the top. They are built from compliance, fear, advantage, habit, persuasion, and exhaustion. In a hall at night, the king gives gifts, The fire brightens the faces of those who must decide whether to follow him. Some see opportunity. Some see danger. Some remember rival bloodlines. Some think of the church rising near the old sacred place. Some count the silver. Some watch the warriors near the door. Some imagine their sons in royal service, their daughters in strategic marriages, their land protected, their autonomy diminished. A poet speaks. He names ancestors. He praises victory. He folds the ruler into a story larger than the room. This too is politics. A king needs swords, but he also needs memory. He must be placed inside a tale that makes obedience feel ancient, honorable, and inevitable. Without story, power is only fear. With story, power becomes destiny. Yet destiny is always written by survivors. Many claimants failed. Many kings died violently. Many royal projects collapsed, then rose again in another name. The road to monarchy was not a straight road through triumph. It was a track through mud, blood, baptismal water, market silver, family calculation, and burned halls. By 1000 AD, the Viking world had not disappeared, but it had begun to transform from within. The ships still sailed. Warriors still sought fame. Farmers still watched the sky. Traders still weighed silver. Old memories still glowed in winter stories. But new structures were taking hold. The North was entering the age of Christian kingdoms, and with that entrance came both loss and creation. The chieftain's hall did not vanish. It became court, manor, royal seat, episcopal residence, legend, ruin, and buried posthole. The sea kings did not vanish. They became monarchs, dukes, saints, tyrants, patrons, ancestors, and warnings. The Viking world did not simply fall. It hardened into history. The earth remembers what people forget. Beneath churchyards, farm fields, city streets, river mud, peat bogs, dunes, harbors, collapsed halls, and wind-cut burial mounds, the Viking world remains unfinished. It survives not as one clean story, but as fragments: a bent sword, a glass bead, a silver coin cut for weight, a child's comb, a spindle whorl, a burned beam, a ship rivet, a horse tooth, a woman's brooch, a man's jaw broken by iron, a slave shackle dark with corrosion, a cross, a hammer, a name carved in stone by hands that wanted memory to outlast breath. To enter this world through archaeology is to enter a conversation with silence. The dead do not explain themselves. The soil does not speak in sentences. It offers patterns, disturbances, residues, alignments, and absences. Stratigraphic excavation follows the order of deposits like pages in a damaged book. Radiocarbon dating pulls bone, charcoal, textile, and timber into measurable time. Dendrochronology can place a felled tree into a precise year when the evidence allows it. Isotope analysis can reveal movement, diet, and childhood landscapes. Genomic data can trace ancestry, kinship, and population history, not as legend imagined them, but as bodies carried them. Yet science does not make the past smaller. It makes it stranger. Every new method breaks open an older certainty. Graves once assumed to belong to men are re-examined. Migration once imagined as simple conquest becomes a braided pattern of families, captives, merchants, and mixed communities. Diets reveal local adaptation. Bones reveal violence and labor. Coins reveal connections from northern farms to distant mints. Residues in pots reveal meals eaten by people whose voices have vanished. The more we know, the less the Viking world resembles the flat image painted by later fantasies. The Viking legacy is therefore not a helmet, a slogan, or a single bloodline. It is a landscape of consequences in language, place names, legal customs, settlement patterns, towns, myths, literature, seafaring memory, political transformation, and archaeological traces. The Viking Age helped shape the medieval North Atlantic and beyond, England, Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, Normandy, Iceland, Greenland, the Baltic, the river worlds of the East, and the Scandinavian kingdoms all carry marks of this age. Some are obvious. Some are buried so deeply in ordinary life that they no longer look like history at all. The sagas became one of the great vessels of memory. Written down in Christian Iceland centuries after many of the events they describe, they are not simple windows onto the Viking Age. They are crafted literature, shaped by memory, politics, artistry, faith, family pride, and distance. But they preserve something precious all the same. They preserve a way of thinking about honor, fate, kinship, speech, violence, exile, law, and reputation. They show people arguing under pressure, choosing badly, loving fiercely, laughing in dark rooms, and walking toward doom with open eyes. A saga is not a photograph. It is a firelit mirror. It tells us as much about the society that remembered as the society remembered. Yet that is no weakness. Memory is itself history. What later generations chose to preserve reveals what they feared losing. They remembered voyages because movement mattered. They remembered feud because honor remained dangerous. They remembered strong women because power had never belonged only to swords. They remembered old gods because the Christian present still heard thunder in the old names. Runestones, too, stand as hard little storms of memory. They are public grief made permanent. They name the dead, praise travelers, mark bridges, claim faith, announce family, and place human life into landscape. Many are brief, but their brevity is part of their force. A person lived. Someone loved or needed them enough to carve stone. A name was not allowed to vanish without resistance. In a world where most voices disappeared, these stones remain upright acts of defiance against oblivion. But the legacy is also darker. Viking violence was real. Monasteries burned. Captives were taken. Families were broken. Slavery was woven into trade. Towns prospered in part through human suffering. Silver glittered because others had lost it. To remember the Viking Age honestly is not to polish it into hero worship. It is to hold brilliance and brutality in the same hand. The longship was a masterpiece of engineering, and it could deliver terror. The warrior's ring was beautiful, and it might have been bought with blood. The market was alive with exchange, and human beings stood there for sale. Modern fascination often tries to choose only one truth. Some imagine the Vikings as noble rebels of freedom and strength. Others reduce them to savage raiders. Both images are too small. They were farmers and poets, traders and killers, colonists and craftsmen, enslavers and settlers, lawmakers and oath-breakers, explorers and exploiters, converts and traditionalists, parents and mourners. They were not symbols waiting to serve modern desire. They were people. That may be the most difficult legacy to accept. Because real people are harder to use than myths, the Viking world reminds us that identity is never as pure as memory later claims. Ancient DNA, isotopes, burial evidence, and material culture all show movement, mixture, adoption, and change. The North was never sealed from the world. It was open to silver from the east, Christianity from the south, settlement in the west, captives from many shores, and ideas moving in every direction. The idea of an untouched, isolated Viking people belongs more to modern longing than medieval reality. The past is not property. It is inheritance, and inheritance carries responsibility. When we look at a ship burial, we are seeing both engineering and grief. When we look at a hoard, we are seeing both wealth and fear. When we look at a weapon wound in bone, we are seeing both conflict and a human body that once felt pain. When we look at a brooch, we are seeing both fashion and the hand that fastened it in the morning. Archaeology asks us to slow down, to resist turning evidence into decoration, and to let the dead remain complicated. Picture the North at the end of a long day. A ruined hall lies beneath grass. Sheep graze where benches once held warriors. A churchyard wall encloses bones from generations that no longer know the names of the first converts buried there. In a museum case, a sword rests without its hand. A carved comb lies clean and labeled, no longer tangled with hair. A bead glows under soft light, separated from the throat it once adorned. A ship, lifted from burial darkness, becomes both artifact and ghost. Visitors pass by. They whisper. They take photographs. They lean close to glass. They read dates, places, measurements, materials. They see iron, bronze, bone, silver, wool, oak, and stone. But behind each label there is a lost weather, a real morning, a real hunger, a real argument, a real laugh, a real departure from shore, a real body lowered into earth. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden, not because science has failed, but because no science can restore everything. It can recover diets, dates, ancestry, injuries, roots, and materials. It cannot fully recover the private tremor before a voyage, the exact tone of a mother's warning, the smell of one particular winter hall, the prayer spoken by someone unsure which God was listening, or the last thought of a man watching a black sail approach his coast. The Viking Age ended. If endings can ever be trusted, raiding changed into royal war. Chieftains became nobles. Pagan rites retreated into memory, story, and stubborn custom. Towns grew. Churches rang bells over old landscapes. Kingdoms took firmer shape. The sea remained, but its meanings shifted. A ship could still carry warriors, but now more often under kings, bishops, laws, taxes, and banners that belonged to a different order of the world. Yet the old wake remains. It remains in the languages people speak without knowing each word's deep voyage. It remains in the names of places. It remains in genetic traces carried quietly through generations. It remains in stories retold around new kinds of fire. It remains in the image of the ship as freedom, danger, and fate. It remains in the fascination that draws us again and again toward the northern sea. And perhaps that fascination endures because the Viking world stands at a threshold we still recognize. Between freedom and order, between violence and law, between old gods and new faith, between home and horizon, between the desire to belong and the desire to leave, they lived at that threshold with extraordinary intensity. They built houses against winter, ships against distance, laws against bloodshed, stories against forgetting, and graves against disappearance. They did not know they were living inside an age that future centuries would name. No one does. They knew only weather, hunger, ambition, fear, loyalty, grief, and the bright, impossible pull of the unknown. Tonight, the northern sea is dark again. The longship is gone from the horizon. The hall fire has sunk into ash. The market has fallen silent. The assembly field is empty. The old gods have become stories, though stories are never harmless things. The kings who rose from storm are dust. The women with keys, the traders with scales, the slaves in chains, the poets, smiths, farmers, sailors, children, queens, killers, and mourners have all passed beneath the earth. But not entirely. A rivet remains. A stone remains. A word remains. A road across water remains in the imagination, and somewhere beneath the northern soil, another discovery waits in darkness, patient as winter, holding its secret until the spade, the brush, the scanner, or the accident of a farmer's plow brings it once more into light. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. Until then, we are left standing at the shore, answerless, adrift to ponder, listening to waves move over the old sea roads, and wondering how much of ourselves has also been buried for someone else to find.